But how do you know you're right? How do you know that what you're saying is correct? Can you prove anything to be true? Isn't everything you're saying just your biased opinion? Aren't you just pushing your ignorant, ideological agenda upon others? Haven't you just gone down the rabbit hole? That's your truth. This is my truth, and never the two shall meet. There is no objective truth, and we are living in the post-truth age. You may have heard these arguments before, and if you're doing any sort of truth-seeking or history like I am, this is a fundamental problem. I can't say anything about history if I can't prove that I'm right. If all I'm doing is just giving you my subjective opinion or feelings, then it's not real history, and you can ignore what I'm saying. But not only that, nobody can do history or anything else. If everyone is just giving their opinion based on their own feelings and intuitions, then there is no truth. You can, and therefore should, ignore everybody, because it's all fake. Fake news, fake history, fake reality. And in a post-truth world, you only have two options: faith in religion or ideology, or just outright skepticism. And it's clear that the Western world is in crisis because of this choice. Many are succumbing to nihilism, life has no purpose, society sucks, let it rot, or they're turning to ideology, since if there is no truth, you may as well latch onto something that, on the surface, promises you a life after death, life after revolution. And seemingly all roads lead to this problem. Leopold von Ranke was the first modern historian, and he said, "Observe history and stick to the facts, bro." He said that we had to narrate the past as it really was. We shouldn't judge the past by the standards of the present, and he said our personal opinions shouldn't be part of history. This is where the idea comes from that history is just names and dates, Battle of Hastings, 1066, that sort of thing. This is because Ranke was an empiricist. His empirical evidence meant that he could only talk about what he could observe. This is where we get the idea of primary and secondary sources from. Primary sources are those that directly saw the event. They observed history and then recorded it. Diaries, memoirs, audio, video. Ranke was a post-Hume empiricist, and he said that these were the most valuable sources since they directly observed history, which is what empiricism means: observation of experience. Historians are therefore less reliable because they didn't directly see the history. They got their information second-hand, hence secondary sources. So straight away, we have the first modern historian saying that historians are not as trustworthy as the super-de-duper, always trustworthy, mega-ultra-reliable primary sources. And yes, I'm being sarcastic and foreshadowing for later. But another problem quickly becomes apparent. There are questions that the primary sources cannot answer. What is the meaning behind these events? Why did these events occur? What was the most important factor? And let's give a concrete example. We know World War II happened. We know the dates and outcomes of the battles. And we know who won, because the primary sources tell us these things. But when was the turning point of the war? The primary sources do not answer this, so a debate has raged ever since, and even now nobody knows the definitive answer to this question. In order to answer it, you can't just observe history via the primary sources or just stick to the facts, bro. You would have to interpret the history itself. But interpretation isn't an observation. It's not empirical. It requires a mind, and a mind provides various opinions and interpretations which cannot be conclusively proven or disproven by the sources alone. And so empiricism, observing the experience or sticking to the facts, gives way to subjectivism, personal opinions and feelings. And I just want to emphasize this, even if you start with empiricism, sticking to the facts, you end up in subjectivism. This tank has this gun. It's got this much armour, and the engine was this. But is it a good tank? Does it have a good gun? Is the armour thickness sufficient? Was the engine reliable? Would it have been better to make a different tank rather than this one? Well, as soon as you attempt to answer those questions, you're no longer in empiricism. You've now moved over to subjectivism. And then the problem quickly escalates. I may think that this is a good tank, but somebody else might say it's a bad tank. How do we prove that we're right? The empirical evidence doesn't prove our subjective opinions. It doesn't say whether this was a good tank or not. And since everyone is clearly just giving their opinions or feelings, we're not even talking about truth anymore. You end up with the "this is my truth and that is your truth" arguments, and nobody can be proven right or wrong. You either accept that everyone is right and all opinions are equally valid, relativism, or the opposite, that everyone is wrong because they cannot truly know the truth, skepticism. So we're all in this mess together. We have no truth, because nobody can prove anything right or wrong. Well, if there is no truth, the only thing we can do then is rely on belief. Belief in God, belief in an ideology, or belief in nihilism. Everything becomes faith. Faith in the idea you hold dear to your heart. You know you're right, not from the evidence, but from your faith. And no matter what you do, you can't convert anybody to your faith, and they can't convert you. Conversions do happen, but they're rare. And so this is where the arguments begin. There can be no persuasion, no conversion. In the grim darkness of the post-truth age, there is only screeching. You're biased. You're just pushing your ideological agenda. I can't be bothered listening to your insane lies. Everything is fascist. You've gone down the rabbit hole. Nobody agrees with you. Wikipedia says. You're just a conspiracy theorist. Fake news. That's disinformation. I don't know, therefore aliens. You're just engaging in mental gymnastics. It's all propaganda. It's all lies. You're rewriting history, or the best one, you just want to kill grandma. So obviously there's a lot of slander, smearing, gaslighting, and just outright nonsense, all as a direct result of subjectivism. Everything becomes faith, and since you cannot convert the faithful with words, you have to rely on the sword. It starts with false accusations and insults, then escalates to actual violence. The West is seeing this now because we're lost in a sea of subjectivism. There have been attempts to overcome this problem. In the late 1990s, Richard Evans wrote the book In Defense of History, where he tried to combat the rise of skepticism and the rise of the postmodernist historians. He said, "What we must do is gather the evidence and interpret the sources in order to craft a narrative or case. Once we have this case, we will then present this to the world and engage in a civil debate with others over whether this narrative was right or wrong. This historical debate," he said, "will naturally allow the best arguments to rise to the top, and when we get to the top, we will reach the demiurge, the truth." And yes, Evans was engaging in dialectics. This all sounds great in theory, but in practice it doesn't work. Even assuming we had time to talk to every single person in existence, and even assuming we could get these people to listen, and we could get them to stop the insults, and we could convince them not to dismiss the evidence, which 9 times out of 10 is what they're doing, just because someone makes a persuasive argument doesn't mean it's right. You could have this super charismatic, really handsome person who's got several PhDs, way more accreditation than his opposition, and he just convinces everyone in a live debate that the sun goes round the earth. Well, according to this debate idea, the sun now goes round the earth because he won the debate. And we have evidence of this happening in real life. They're called politicians or journalists. These people are lying through their teeth all the time in order to sell you their snake oil. And they're very persuasive. Millions of people have fallen for their narratives. So debate is not sufficient. But you might say, logic would win out in the end. And you would be wrong. The majority of the population currently believe in contradictions, which is the opposite of logic. They think contradictions are proof that reality is not real. It is a materialist illusion. It is a matrix. It is a shadow on Plato's cave. Contradictions are inherent within many religions around the world, and in Karl Marx's texts. Yet millions of people believe in these scriptures. So the vast majority of the population does not believe in logic, and even if they did, a consensus means nothing. Voting does not equal truth. If everyone believes the moon is made of cheese, that does not make it so. Therefore, it's not possible to get an answer via debate or consensus, and even if we could, that answer wouldn't necessarily be the truth. Richard Evans, by the way, whether he was conscious of this influence or not, based his ideas on Immanuel Kant, or as I like to call him, Immanuel see you next Tuesday. It has its origins before this, but Kant embedded modern skepticism in the Western world. The question, but how do you know you're right, essentially comes from Immanuel Kant, as well as Hume. So Evans, again conscious of it or not, used Kant to reply to Kant. And it's no wonder he failed. And I've always said the catchphrase, history lies in the heart of the debate. It's been essential to this channel from the very first history video I did, Market Garden, and I created this phrase after reading Richard Evans' book. And I've tried. Oh, I've tried over the past few years to salvage the current theory of history. But I just couldn't do it. I have files and whiteboards, notepads, numerous books on the topic. All roads lead to the same conclusion, that the current version of history theory does not work. And I burnt out because of it. I asked myself, what's the point of doing history if you cannot get to the truth? Why bother reading the literature if the literature is all wrong, and I can't know that my interpretation is correct? How do I know that I'm right when there's no way to prove it? And debate doesn't work either, because why listen to anyone else when they're just giving their biased opinions? So if no one will believe you anyway, why not just throw in the towel? Aren't I just speaking to an echo chamber? Am I not preaching to the choir? Do my viewers only listen to me because they trust me? Because as Eric Vogelin said, all interaction is based on trust, and trust is a spiritual act. So am I just a priest? Is history all about faith? Because if that is the case, then history cannot be done. History is the study of reality, and since there is no reality, history is dead. For 4 long, excruciating years, I suffered with this burnout. I looked everywhere, but there was no answer to this problem. People on the channel, friends in real life, fans and critics alike would ask me, but how do you know you're right? And I wouldn't be able to answer them. Think of all the propaganda we are subjected to. How do we know it's all lies? I couldn't say, other than instinctively, that we should doubt the narratives we were given, but I'm not the only one. Many of the people asking me, how do you know you're right, were asking this out of sheer desperation. They wanted the answer. They wanted someone to make sense of an insane world, and I didn't have that answer. And so I vowed to either find an answer or make one myself. Luckily, the answer was already out there. I've had to tailor it to history itself, but the vast majority of the work was done by other people, and with every other school of thought leading to the same conclusion that truth is subjective and history is dead, let me walk you through the real answer to this problem. A rock is not conscious. It does not perceive reality. It just sits there, doing nothing. You, on the other hand, are a conscious being. And if you are conscious, that means you perceive reality. To be conscious means to be aware of one's surroundings. In other words, it means to perceive reality. In addition, all conscious beings have an identity. I don't care what you are, human, animal, alien, God, a single-cell organism, an artificial intelligence, it doesn't matter. If you are conscious, you have an identity, and you can perceive reality in some way, shape, or form. Now that we've established our consciousness, we can see that we live in reality. We do not live in a dream world. We do not live in a fake materialist matrix or a simulation of some kind. Existence exists in and of itself, and using our senses, touch, sight, smell, etc., we can sense this reality. In addition, we sense reality directly through our sense organs. Our eyes do not change reality before it hits our brain, nor does our brain swap out reality for something else before it hits our consciousness. We sense reality directly with no intermediary. Reality is what it is, and our senses grasp it directly. Yes, illusions do exist. A pencil will appear bent or broken if you put it in water. But our senses are not at fault here. We do see the bend or break in the pencil, even though the pencil isn't really bent or broken. So our senses are working, and they're telling us we are able to perceive something about the nature of water and light, and thus of reality itself. We sense reality, we get a perception of what reality is, and we can then conceive of ways to explain it. Refraction is the process of light and sound bending when passing through a transparent surface. I will let you look up the science behind it in your own time. The point is that our senses are perfectly valid. Reality exists, and it is the object we are studying. We are conscious, so we directly sense reality, and all our senses are valid, and thus all of our perceptions are valid as well. The way our brains organize and interpret the sense data we receive is what perception is, and this can be different from person to person. We could both eat fish, and you might perceive fish as tasting lovely. I, on the other hand, perceive fish as tasting horribly. Our senses both taste the fish, but we perceive it differently. And neither of us are wrong. Both of our senses and both of our perceptions of the fish are valid. There is no contradiction here. It is a fact that one person likes fish and another person does not. So there is no contradiction. Now, yes, a colourblind man who sees red as grey may not be able to differentiate between red and grey, and we could say that the quantity of information the colourblind man receives is less than the rest of us. But just because there are colours outside of his range of perception doesn't mean he cannot learn about other colours. The colourblind man doesn't end up with a different physics to the rest of us. Light particles don't work differently when in the presence of the colourblind. They don't think, oh, there's a colourblind person here, better slow down for him. Physics works the same for him as it does for the rest of us, and we've all learnt of colours we cannot see. Infrared and ultraviolet colours exist. We cannot perceive them directly without instruments, but we have detected them. Dogs can hear sounds that we cannot hear, and we've learnt this. And it's a certainty that there is more stuff out there that we cannot detect right now. But regardless of whether we do or don't detect things, we all share the same reality, and we can all come to understand that reality. So there are quantitative differences in our senses and perceptions, but that does not mean we all live in our own separate subjective realities. Dogs don't live on a different plane of existence just because they hear differently. We live in one objective reality. It's only when we arrive at the third level, the conceptual level, that the term subjective could be applied. So we have our objective consciousness, which means we exist in an objective reality, and the three levels through which we can detect this reality are sensual, perceptual, and conceptual. The first two, sense and perception, are objective in all instances, and it's only the third, the conceptual level, where we might see subjectivity. And the question is, why? Well, every man has a choice. They can either choose to accept reality, or they can choose to depart from reality. And by this, we're not talking about errors. Adding 2 + 2 and getting 5 is an honest mistake, but declaring, I believe that 2 + 2 = 5 because I feel it in my bones, is a subjective belief. Such a person doesn't care about objective reality. He has placed his own person, the subject, above objective reality. When we receive sense data, we perceive it. and then can start to form concepts, the building blocks of human knowledge. In a nutshell, we sense something, perceive it, and then abstract higher until we can form a concept of it. Then we give it a name. This is a book. Is it not a book because you look at it differently? No. Is it not a book because you call it by a different name? No. It is what it is. It doesn't matter how you perceive it or what name you give it, the conceptual conclusions we must come to about this object, and of reality as a whole, are identical. Now, there are borderline cases. When does red become orange? When does a town become a city? When does something private become something public? Well, there's no definitive answer here because there's an option built into the nature of reality. When looking at red and orange, you don't even need to draw a line between the two. And if you do, it doesn't matter where you draw the line. If you want to, you could say all the in-betweens are reddy-orange, or you can define each individual shade on its own. You don't need to associate it with red or orange. But the existence of borderline cases doesn't mean we don't exist, or that reality is an illusion, or that my reality is different to your reality. No, borderline cases exist in reality, and if needed, we can clarify what we mean when those cases come up. And with all this in mind, we now come to the question, but how do you know you're right? Well, first, this actually has a name. It's called Cartesian doubt, and it comes from a philosopher called Descartes. When you boil it down, what it says is, because man can err, man will err all the time, and thus it is impossible for man to know anything. But how do you know you're right? There's no way for me to know because I'm not infallible. So, is there a way to overcome it? Yes. To make an error is to depart from the truth. So, in order to declare something as being wrong, you would have to know what right is. And inherent within the question, but how do you know you're right, is the assumption that man is always wrong. You're basically saying you can never prove that you're right in all instances. Well, man would need to know what is right in order to declare that man is always wrong. But if man is always wrong, he cannot know what is right, and therefore would be unable to declare that man is always wrong. In other words, it's a self-contradictory statement. The question, but how do you know you're right, hinges on the idea that it's possible that you're wrong, isn't it? And while it is true that man can make errors, it is false to conclude that man will always err in every single instance. My name is Lewis. It is not Bob. It is not Robert Paulson. It is Lewis. But how do you know you're right? Because that is my name. Are you sure? Yes. But it's possible that you're wrong, isn't it? No, and if my name wasn't actually Lewis, I'm now declaring it to be Lewis, at which point it is Lewis. So, enough with the stupid questions. It is impossible for man to be wrong in every instance, just like it's impossible for man to be right in every instance. If I declared I'm always right, that would be wrong. Similarly, I'm always wrong would be wrong too. It's not possible to be always right or always wrong. But yes, while man can be right, he's not automatically right. Therefore, all he has to do is validate his conclusions using the correct method. So then, the only question is, what is the correct method of validating ideas? Well, if I was to give it a one-sentence answer, it would be this. Conscious man must logically validate his knowledge by basing his conceptual conclusions on a foundation of direct evidence perceived by the senses. This will require a bit more explanation, which I'll go into shortly, but what is essential here is that because we now have a full understanding that Consciousness has identity, that existence exists, that we sense reality directly, perceive it, and form concepts logically rather than by feelings or belief. We can validate our conclusions. We can be objective. Subjectivism and the subjectivist theory of history are dead, and it is now time to resurrect history and give it an objective foundation. When a man witnesses an event, he may decide to record it. Usually this is through the written word, but more recently you may see video or audio too. These are currently classed as primary sources. Unless it is a genuine forgery, and you can prove that, this record of the past is always valid. It may not be right, it may contain lies, it may contain distortions, but it is always a valid source. You cannot throw out or dismiss a primary source just because you don't like it. If you dismiss genuine primary sources, you are invalidating your perception of history and therefore distorting reality. Historians then come along, gather the eyewitness testimony, and create a narrative of history from these. These narratives of history are currently classed as secondary sources. And here's the part many people are not going to like. You cannot throw out or dismiss a secondary source just because you don't like it. Yes, there are differences in quality between different historians and histories, and some may not be right, but they are still valid. The only ones that are invalid are those that rely upon feelings or belief rather than evidence. Some think it's okay to not use evidence at all, some think it's okay to pull rabbits out of the hat and just make stuff up as they go along, others think it's okay to change words of the text at their whim, or select the sources that they think support their narrative and ignore the ones that don't. The list could go on for a while here, but a genuine historian consciously validates his own knowledge of history by basing his conceptual conclusions on a foundation of logic and as much evidence as he could possibly gather. When he does this, then his history is valid. It may not be right, but it is valid. So we have the primary and secondary sources. And I was going to go into a huge explanation as to why I've now rearranged the sources into tiers based on their usefulness. Tier A contains the most useful sources, going down to Tier E being the least useful, with F being invalid sources that we can discard. But going through this would take way too long and would bog this video down, so for the sake of brevity, I will explain this fully in a separate video. All you need to know today is that Leopold von Ranke split the sources into primary and secondary because he was an empiricist, meaning that he placed his emphasis on observation of the experience or event. But once you understand that truth lies in the logical validation of the conceptual conclusions based on a foundation of direct evidence, the sources must be arranged in order of how logically valid their conclusions are. The emphasis should not be on whether the person saw the event or not, but on whether their explanation of reality is most correct. Only historians, with time on their side, can overcome the limitations, biases, and contradictions in the primary and secondary sources, and thus move closer to the truth. So, the most up-to-date history books tend to present the most accurate and truthful history. Yes, not every history book is equal, there are quality differences between historians obviously, but in general, memoirs and newspapers are usually completely wrong, which is where the fake news thing comes from, and we get closer to the truth as time marches on. Again, I'll cover this in depth in the future, but the most accurate histories come from the historians, which is the opposite of what Ranke was saying. Because we are conscious beings, we must perceive reality. In order to fully understand reality, we would need to perceive as much of it as possible. So it stands to reason that in order to get the best, the most complete perception of reality, we must use all the sources we possibly can. It is for our benefit that we gather as much evidence as possible from all perspectives, because doing so grants us the best possible opportunity to grasp reality as it really is. And this does not mean that we can just throw a source into our source list and call it a day. No, we have to actually use it, and we have to understand it. If you don't understand a source, you need to do your homework. You must strive to understand it. Don't just call it insane and dismiss it, which unfortunately many people do. And once you've got all the various sources and have understood them all, you must overcome the contradictions in order to come to the most logical conclusion. The light is either on or it's off. It can't be both. You were either born or you weren't. You can't be born and unborn at the same time. In this reality, contradictions do not exist. You can perceive contradictions in the sources, but on the conceptual level, contradictions mean that you've got something wrong. So for example, Hegel loves contradictions. He is Mr. Contradiction. Me pointing at Hegel and saying he loves contradictions is not me stating a contradiction. My narrative is not contradictory, even if my subject matter is. If I said Hegel could go left and right at the same time, that would be a contradiction on my part because Hegel can't split into two. But if Hegel believed that he could go left and right at the same time, and I pointed that out, that wouldn't be a contradiction on my part. We must strive to overcome the contradictions within our own narratives using logic and evidence in order to validate our conclusions. Once you've got all the various sources, understood them all, overcome the contradictions, and have come to the most logical conclusions, that's when you know you've validated your knowledge of history. If you've done this, you'll notice that all the sources and conclusions and so on will be integrated into a whole. The pieces of the puzzle will all fit together perfectly. It'll all be in alignment, maybe with some borderline cases, but that's not a problem. If contradictions do still exist, or if you're unable to integrate everything together, or if lots of questions remain unanswered, then you need to rethink. I've noticed that when people throw a source at me saying that it contradicts me and therefore I must be wrong, usually when I examine it, it turns out not to be true. Either it contradicts itself, especially if it's a secondary source, or I find that it can actually be integrated in with what I've already concluded. This is a good indication that I've come to the correct conclusions previously. If this didn't happen, if there was a source that absolutely contradicted what I'd previously concluded, then I would have no choice but to reassess in order to integrate it into the whole. And this is the crucial point. If you're using all the sources, you have no choice but to logically integrate them into a whole. The ability to integrate everything together is crucial for validating your conclusions about reality. And note, a consensus is not required. It's nice, but it's not a requirement. Just because everyone thinks the moon is made of cheese doesn't make it so. So consensus is irrelevant. What matters is the logical validation of your conclusions based on the evidence. And that's not my truth versus your truth, that's not what's happening here. If you're studying reality rather than fiction, then you're studying the objective truth, not your own subjective truth. The reasons for a disagreement may be because of a misunderstanding, or borderline cases, or one person's failure to logically integrate all the evidence and come to the right conclusions. So just because there is no consensus, or we disagree with the consensus, doesn't mean we're right or wrong. This also means debate is not required either. You do not need to debate history in order to prove that you're coming to the right conclusions. A debate could be useful as part of the process of validation, but a debate is an optional extra, it's not a requirement. As long as I'm integrating all the evidence, coming to the logical conclusions, and you're offering nothing new in that regard, then I don't have to engage in a live debate. I don't have to try and convince you that you're wrong, especially if you're allowing belief to distort your view of reality. So I hereby am retiring one of the catchphrases of this channel. History does not lie in the heart of the debate. That is false, and I was wrong, and I was misled. History lies in integration, the logical validation of your conclusions based on a foundation of evidence, all integrated together. And I just want to clarify, the catchphrase, "but is this really the case?" still remains. But it is not a stand-in for Cartesian doubt. How do you know you're right? But is this really the case is not to be used to question everything for the sake of undermining everything. It is only to be used as a prompt to get you in the habit of validating your conclusions. So, 2 plus 2 equals 4. But is this really the case? Let me double check the evidence. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Yes, 2 plus 2 does actually equal 4. Therefore, I have validated my conclusions. That's the only time "but is this really the case" is meant to be used, or maybe as a prompt for others to do the same if they're not validating their conclusions. One major thing that's important here is that you are a conscious being. You are aware of the world, and your personal perception of the world is valid. It may not be right, but it is valid. Denying your own consciousness or denying your own personal perception or conclusions is going against reality. You are who you are, and you can't pretend to be something that you're not. You can't pretend to not be conscious, which would mean that you're not aware and cannot perceive reality. Turning off your brain is not the mark of an intelligent being. And yet, many do turn off their brains, and you see this all the time. Historians, including other YouTubers, will pretend to be these neutral blank slates who have no opinion, no politics, no ideology, and they pretend that they can just stick to the facts, bro. And it's complete nonsense. I know for a fact that several YouTube historians pretend to be blank slates, but do in fact have opinions, are political, and have fallen for ideological narratives. They may not admit it to you or themselves, but it is true. And I don't blame them, because modern history was forged by Ranke and rests on empiricism as its foundation. Almost all historians and empiricists believe that if they had no personality, no consciousness, no intelligence, if they didn't exist, only then could they create a perfect, fact-only history. Wrong. You are conscious and therefore exist. Your personality, opinions, biases, and so on is part of who you are. You are not a blank slate. A blank slate, a rock, is not conscious. A rock cannot perceive reality. Only conscious beings can perceive reality. And thus, you denying yourself is a denial of self and reality. Without yourself, you cannot do history, or anything else for that matter. A source for a lot of depression, anxiety, poverty, and sadness in the modern world is due to people not having a strong sense of self, but that's a topic for another day. Because you're a conscious being and you have a self, whether you accept it or not, you are permitted to form your own conceptual conclusions and put them into the history books. You are allowed to be flawed, you are allowed to be limited, and you are allowed to be biased and have agendas. My agenda is to get to the objective truth about history, and if that's a bad thing, then I'm guilty as charged. And even if your agenda is to tell lies, that's fine, you'll get called out on it, but if it's who you are, then that's who you are. Regardless, there are no unbiased sources. They are all limited, and people have wants and needs, desires and goals. Agenda is part of human nature. Impartiality is not possible in every instance, and being conscious means you have an identity and you have a personality, and that's fine. Denying that is denying reality. So stop trying to be a rock, a blank slate, and start being human. Please. Ranke was wrong, and the empiricists were wrong as well. You are allowed to put your own personality into history, and those historians that have done that tend to be the best, and it's no wonder why. So, now that I've walked you through all this, the good news is that I was mostly using the correct method of history before this point, so this doesn't invalidate any of my previous videos, except for the old history theory video, which I've now unlisted. You can still watch it via the link in the description if you want to. But the rest of the videos are mostly correct, with the exception of when I say history lies in the heart of the debate. That's not true anymore. History lies in the heart of integration. And you might be wondering where I got all this information from to overcome subjectivism and Cartesian doubt. Obviously some of this is experience, especially with the source stuff. Some of it is due to having studied history theory before, but a lot of the new information regarding conscious man logically validating his knowledge based on conceptual conclusions built on a foundation of direct evidence perceived by the senses comes from somewhere else. And I got it from a particular school of thought. But I want to point out the cart did not come before the horse. I didn't go to these people first, then decide that history was dead. Under the subjective theory of history, history is dead. It can't be done anymore, and that's why I burnt out. I tried my hardest to save the old method of history, and I just couldn't do it. All roads led to a post-truth subjectivism, where there is no truth and history is dead. Only this one school of thought was offering the answer to this problem, and luckily I didn't listen to all the idiots out there telling me not to look into them. Using the principles laid out by this school of thought, it was possible to resurrect history from the grave. The school of thought is, of course, the objectivist school, developed by Ayn Rand. I've only recently stumbled into them thanks to people recommending Leonard Peikoff's The Cause of Hitler's Germany, which is behind me. And I'm still new to all this stuff, and I'm only halfway through Atlas Shrugged, but so far, the most useful source has been Leonard Peikoff's History of Philosophy series here on YouTube. I highly recommend that lecture series. But other books of theirs as well, the Dim Hypothesis, for example, have helped as well. Again, I only went to objectivism after seeing that all the other options came to the same conclusion, subjectivism and Cartesian doubt. Some people have said that I should use Bayes' theorem, claiming that this is the only valid method of history. But if you can't prove that reality exists, or you don't think that you can perceive reality with everything being subjective, then Bayes' theorem is worthless. What is needed is an objective theory of reality and thus an objective theory of history. You can't mathematically calculate that the universe is real and not a subjective experience. Thus, Bayes' theorem isn't sufficient. So, how do you know you're right? How do you know that what you're saying is correct? Can you prove anything to be true? Yes. With an objective theory of reality and of history, you can validate your conclusions and know the truth of the world you live within. So when someone asks you, but how do you know you're right? The answer is this. Because I've logically validated my conclusions based on the evidence and integrated everything into a whole. If you don't think my conclusions are true, please provide me with your own logically validated conclusions that are also based on the evidence so that I can compare and contrast these to my own. Chances are, since many believe there's no point using evidence, they won't be able to do that. But even if they do, that's fair enough, it'll just be time to reassess. I could say a lot more on this because there's a lot of counter-arguments and such, which don't stand up to scrutiny, but I won't bog this video down. I'll wait for the inevitable backlash first. I'll also follow up with a source tier list video, so be sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already. And if you found this video useful, please let me know, especially if you're a historian or a history teacher, because I think we've all had our doubts about the method of history we're using and whether our interpretations were correct or not. So let me know. And obviously I want everyone else's feedback as well. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.